This instrument has way more potential than you're probably using, and today I want to help you explore some new sounds with some really easy techniques so that you can make the most out of it. Let's start with the different ways that we can strike. Keep it simple to start with and then get more advanced as we go throughout this tutorial. The first way, of course, is a flat percussive strike. So I'm using the tip of my finger, but I'm using quite a lot of it, just kind of this area of my finger. And I'm striking fairly central in each note. When I get to the lower part of the instrument, I'm using my thumb, but high up, I'm using quite a lot of my finger actually, so that you can hear more of that tap 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 sound. And I'm striking right in the middle of the instrument. If I wanted a softer, more mallet type sound, I could curve my finger and use the very tip. The problem with this though is that my left hand, I play guitar, so I've got calluses on the ends of my fingers, so even when I curve, you can hear it still has a bit of that tap sound. It's quite subtle, but maybe you can hear it between the two fingers. You hear that difference? If you don't play guitar or another instrument that causes these calluses, then you're fine. But for me, I often play with my right hand curved and then my left still actually a little bit flatter, so I can get it as close as possible to keeping the two hands the same. So those are the simple striking techniques. We can also think about where on the note we're striking in order to unlock different sounds as well. So if I strike here in the V, we've got a nice full warm sound. But if I move closer to the wing, you hear more of that high pitched tone coming through. How that changes as you move around. And then if you move away from the V, from the tongue, you get more of that percussive tone. It gets a little bit thinner, a little bit quieter. You can also try striking with different velocity, different strength. And I'm sure you can hear some of those different harmonics coming through, so let's explore isolating some of those now. So if you hold your finger on the V here, and then you strike on the wing, you'll hear that higher frequency coming through. Alternatively, if you press your finger or rest your finger on the wing and strike on the V, you'll hear the lower frequency coming through. So we can explore that when we groove around. So I invite you to explore those harmonics, the different ways that you use your finger, and also the different velocities that you're striking with. Of course, there are other ways that we can use the finger. We can curve even more and strike with our knuckle. I'm using the front knuckle here, the very tip, rather than this one. Otherwise, if I wanted to use this one, I would either have to curve all the way around like this or turn my whole wrist over, which is doable, but I feel like I have less control this way. Whereas if I keep my hand this way and just curve the wrist round, the finger around just ever so slightly, then I still have a lot of control over how I'm striking. And I'm using my middle finger in this case, just because that's more comfortable for me. And what I really love about this sound is that it feels like the doors are closed on a party with music happening, right? And you're on the other side of the doors. And then if you switch to an open strike, just a flat finger strike like this, it almost feels like the doors are opening. Suddenly you can hear the doors are closed, and then they open. It's just a silly little thing that comes to mind when I play that way. And so you can explore dynamics in your pieces and in your improvisations. You can explore how you really craft that sound and make it really move around and inspire the listener's imagination by playing with those different textures and different tones, depending on what you're trying to achieve, what emotions you're trying to bring across in what you're playing. Okay, so then we have two different ways to mute our strikes. The first is an actual percussive mute, like so, right? And by that I mean the mute is in the strike itself. So I'm striking, and then instead of bouncing as we normally would in order to let the drum vibrate, we're keeping the finger down to create that percussive melody. The other way that we can mute is to actually strike the instrument, let it ring briefly, and then bring the hand down to stop the vibration afterwards. So you don't hear the strike of the mute, you just hear the sound all closing. This is an especially good skill to have with an instrument that rings so much. If you want to start playing a little bit faster and more percussively, it's really good to have the ability to mute a note at the same time as striking another one that might otherwise clash. Let's see these two notes, for instance. When played together, they don't sound great, but if I play one after the other, a little better. But the sound is still bleeding because it's got such a long sustain, right? So if I then mute the note that I just played when I play the next one, then I'm giving myself that space to let the other note breathe. Kind of like when you see a piano player use the sustain pedal, right? They will lift from the pedal when they're ready for things to mute, when they move to the next chord, so that everything doesn't bleed over. It's that kind of similar effect. And it's really important to have that ability on an instrument as vibrant and as sustain-y as this. So that's all of the ways that you can strike the instrument and also control the tone of the notes that you're playing. But then of course we can play percussion on this instrument as well. So there is the slap sound. In this case I use most of my middle finger. You might even want to use your ring as well. And I'm slapping quite firm on the edge of the instrument. You can hear that it makes the other notes ring as well. So within your piece, depending on where you're playing, it might be worth deciding where to strike so that it makes your instrument, again, ring in different ways. Part of getting the most out of this instrument is also really listening and being aware of how it's interacting with every strike. Not just taking a slap for granted, right? But actually hearing all of the tiny little changes, the tiny ways that striking in different places and in slightly different ways affects the sound of your instrument, so that you're getting more attuned with it and so that you can just lean into those nuances and really change it up. It's this step into this world of nuance, if you like, that takes you from beginner, intermediate level to sounding like you really know what you're doing, right? Listening to all those individualities, all those tiny little changes, and using those to your advantage. So when you're playing, don't just strike anywhere, but think about how it's reacting when you do strike. And the same goes for your knocks as well. I really actually kind of prefer knocks on the RAV because I find that it doesn't reverberate as much, but it's still quite sharp and I don't have to strike as hard either. And it still punches through quite well. So. Using ghost notes here to create some more intrigue in my rhythms. So I've just got my hands kind of moving on autopilot all of the time in this empty space here. always playing them at exactly the same velocity. I'm also experimenting with adding just an extra tiny little bit of dynamic to those strikes to make them interact with the main accents, to support those main accents and make my grooves a little bit more interesting. I explore this in another video that you can check out after this one. Yeah, ghost notes really do change everything. So I invite you to explore how you're using this space and how you're using these quiet ghost notes as well. You'll notice I added some of these little lazy rolls in there. A lazy roll, I like to call it a lazy roll because I'm literally just dropping my hand and just dropping all of my fingers slightly one after the other, but keeping it as loose as possible. And it's not particularly accentuated, all of the individual strikes with the finger. It's just creating one long brum, right? So it's all about the wrist rotation here. To create a little bit of glitter in your playing. Another fun sound is using the fist to get some bass out of these instruments. I find RAVs compared to handpans so far that I've played don't lend themselves as well to this. I really like the bassy punch that you can get out of a handpan, but if you strike in the right place, you can get something really fun out of this one. You just have to really go for it. Just don't hurt your hand in the process. So those are the fist basses, if you like. I don't know what else to call those. And then finally, in terms of texture, I say finally, there are so many out there that I probably haven't managed to cover, won't manage to cover. More people will discover new things, you will discover new things. The last one I'm going to cover today is a brushstroke. I really love this sound and I don't use it enough, and I don't hear it enough. But it's just really nice. Very subtle, but when you're playing soft, you're playing meditatively. It's quite nice. Also do something similar with your nail to get a slightly harsher sound. And that's the last of the textures. Of course, there's so many other techniques that you can utilize. I invite you to check out this tutorial next to continue on your RAV journey. But I hope you enjoy experimenting and exploring and not being afraid to make crazy, silly sounds and finding your way of making your instrument sing.